morning and welcome to our 2023 Post-Rock Extension District Wheat Test Plot Tour. My name is Sandra Wick. I'm the crop production agent with the Post-Rock Extension District of K-State Research and Extension. So this morning we're going to share a little bit about the condition of the wheat, some of the challenges and things that you guys have been faced throughout the growing season. This wheat has had many challenges. There's been several fields that have been abandoned and destroyed. There are some fields that will be harvested. So we will just have to wait and see what the average of the county, of the district, and of the state comes in. So this morning, like I said, we're going to talk about an update of the conditions. Then we'll go through each of the individual varieties and give you some information. Also, a feature portion of this is we have one of our K-State Research and Extension entomologists, and he's going to share some of the insects maybe that have had an issue with the wheat for the season. So enjoy, and please contact me at any of our Post-Rock Extension District offices in Beloit, Lincoln, Mankato, Osborne, or Smith Center. Thanks. We would especially like to thank our cooperators for our Post-Rock Extension District wheat plots, including Josh Boner, Marty Fletchall, and Art Bedford. These producers are so very special in giving of their time out of their busy schedules to provide wheat yield data for the producers of north central Kansas.
Very well. So Sandra, it seems like you have WB4422 as your check, right? So we're going to talk about it just in a little bit down the road here, because it's where it's besides the WB Grainfield there. So we can skip to this one here, LCS Chrome. Folks, LCS Chrome has been around for a while now. Perhaps many of you may have already planted Chrome. A few of the things that I've liked about Chrome over the years in terms of its agronomics were standability. So it has a pretty good straw strength there. And it combines also a good drought tolerance that allows it to move out west fairly well with a good acid soil tolerance that allows it to move out east. So it has had a large footprint in the state. One concern that I have had with Chrome has been maturity. It is on the late side. Now for you guys up here, that may be okay, because you're far north enough that you might actually be okay there. But I think that it restricted its adaptability as we go from probably saline and south, just because of a very late maturity. LCS Chrome had a really good disease package for many years there in terms of leaf rust, stripe rust, and so on. However, more recently, stripe rust is actually impacting Chrome, so that's something that we need to be aware there. And also, it's quite susceptible to wheat streak mosaic. So we have seen where Chrome got hit really bad by the wheat streak mosaic virus there. It has had some age on it already. There's probably other things now with a better yield potential. I typically like to look at these varieties from a perspective, do they hold well under drought conditions? That's one thing that we want. But also, do they have a good yield potential when we have good yielding conditions, right? That's the other thing that I look at these varieties. And Chrome seems to hold well under those dry conditions. However, it just doesn't seem to have the top end yield potential to keep up with some of the other varieties out there. Protein is going to be above average on this one, not necessarily in terms of baking quality, but protein will be above average here. Coming up next, WB4401. So folks, real quick here as we talk about the West bred varieties, their numbering system, right? First number here for us should always be 4, because it tells us it's a hard red winter wheat. You go to other parts of the country, it's going to start with a different number, right? Perhaps spring wheat may start with a 9. So our varieties should always start with a 4. Next number gives us a relative maturity. So if it's a 1, it's an early maturing variety. If it's a 9, it's a late maturing variety. So a 4 here tells us it's a medium early. Right, so we have a medium early maturity right here. Next number gives us the year of release. So 0 tells us it's a 2020. So 2020 release there. And then last number is just a random number to give us that variety name, right? So again, medium early maturity, 2020 release. WB4401, it's again in that medium early category, but it comes out of the winter dormancy as an early maturing variety. So we have seen where some of those late March, early April freezes that shouldn't really hurt us much have hurt this one when it was planted in the early side of the window, right? Because it gets growing fairly early out of the winter there. So planting this variety, I would probably suggest leaving it towards the more later part of your optimum window there, just so it doesn't start growing too early and gets dinged by those March or April freezes. 4401 is going to be a variety that is medium to medium tall for West bred patterns there. Standability is going to be average, probably not the best standability that we have out here, but also it hangs in there quite well. It's a variety really good on head scab, so if you're going after corn, may be a good option there. It does hang in quite well in those conditions. Yield record for 4401, it has had a really good yield record in 2020 when it was released, 2021 again. But last year, with the drought that we have had, it was more bouncing back and forth. So it didn't really have a really good yield record last year on 4401. Again, because it's not necessarily our best drought-tolerant variety that we have out here. So again, drought can be a concern on this variety.
Can I add something there?
Absolutely.
So we've got about 60 acres out here, 4401, next to Grainfield and next to 4422, and 4401, you could go from here to that sign and not find any wheat before it started raining. It was just the winter kill. It never made it through the winter, especially on the high level slopes. It was about 90% lost it during the winter from the harsh conditions. The 4422 did better, and the Grainfield maybe even a little bit better, but the 4401 just didn't survive.
Yeah, that's a really good comment, and I appreciate you mentioning it out, because we're always kind of trying to learn from your experiences as well there. And that goes along with what we know on this variety in terms of not being the best drought tolerant there, perhaps in with that earlier coming out of the winter, maybe getting hurt a little bit worse there in the winter kill. So maybe a better variety as we go further east because of that lack of drought tolerance that it has. Yep. LCS Photon AX. So folks, this AX here just tells us a coaxium variety. Coaxium is a fairly new technology there for herbicide resistance. We can actually go with the aggressor herbicide to go after some of those grassy weeds if that's a concern. Keep in mind that all coaxium varieties are going to be certified seed only, meaning that they are a single season use there, right? So we can only use that seed one time. Same thing with most of the West bred numbers, right? Most of them are going to be certified seed only as well. LCS Photon AX has got a T158 on the background, so it brings some good drought tolerance to the table. It's a variety that puts a large amount of forage and biomass, so in that context, it's a variety that has done well in terms of forage production. I will note that it doesn't have too much standability, so we've seen where in a little bit higher yielding conditions, Photon AX are actually lodging pretty badly there, so that to me is a concern. I guess nobody really likes to pick wheat out of the ground like that, and so that is a concern with Photon AX. Also very susceptible to low soil pH, right? So acid soils will be a concern for Photon AX. Out of the coaxium varieties, folks, I think that we may have better options out there. I'm going to keep this one a little bit brief there, just because for this region we may have better options within the coaxium lineup. SY Monument. So Monument has been around for a number of years now. I guess very likely many of you guys, how many of you guys have already planted Monument? A few hands there, yep. How many of you guys are still planting Monument? A few hands there. And you know, I think that has been a solid variety for this region. I mean, we were in a plot yesterday just north of Phillipsburg, and it was looking really good. It was a plot planted after soybeans. We took a look at there together, those plots, and the Monument was still looking really good. So it's a variety that has many acres around the state, probably still around that #1 wheat planted around Kansas. There's a few reasons for that. So it combines a good drought tolerance, so it moves out west fairly well. And it combines that with a good acid soil tolerance as well, so it moves out east with that acid soil tolerance very well. High tillering potential on this variety. It has done very well when planted late after soybeans, so that's kind of like the niche for this variety here, where it has done better with that good drought tolerance and good tillering potential. It performs well under those conditions. Medium late in terms of maturity, standability can be just average here as well, so if you have very high yielding conditions, we might see it leaning or having some lodging issues there. Usually, if we're planting after beans, that might not be a concern, right, because we're shortening that crop anyways, just because of drought stress and late planting there. SY Monument, it used to be very resistant to stripe rust, so disease package was very good on Monument. More recently here, this variety was actually the one that we identified a race change in that stripe rust fungus back in 2018 or so. It was planted in so many acres around the state that probably what happened is that the fungus just overcome the resistance that SY Monument had. So today is a variety that we probably need to budget on a foliar fungicide if we're planting Monument out there. Also very susceptible to weed streak mosaic. So if you have a field that is under higher risk of getting weed streak mosaic, and as a reminder, weed streak mosaic is going to be transmitted by the wheat curl mite that survives on a volunteer wheat, right? So if you have a field that is near a neighbor that has volunteer wheat or something, probably not the best option out there because it is quite susceptible to weed streak mosaic. Yield-wise, we've seen, again, when we were seeing it show towards the top, it was more back in that 2016, 17, 18 time frame. Right now, it seems like still hanging in very well among like the above average category. Maybe we have a few varieties that may have a higher yield potential, but I think it's still a pretty solid one. I think it's still a variety that has its place, and if it's working for you, I for sure won't steer you away from this one. Just budget on a fungicide. Have you had Monument recently or?
No, I haven't.
Very well, folks. WB, Grainfield, and WB 4422 that we skipped right there in the beginning, right? So WB Grainfield is another one that, just like SY Monument, has been around for a number of years. And WB Grainfield, overall, it's a variety that I think has its space in this part of the state still. It's kind of like an older one out there, but as we were talking before, of varieties that can keep its yield under drought stress and then also have the capacity to bounce back and really have a good yield potential if the conditions are there. WB Grainfield kind of fits that bill, right? It's a variety that, again, has really good drought tolerance. I like to say Grainfield is a western variety that moves quite well into central Kansas. And I think of Monument as the other way around, is more of a central variety that moves well into western Kansas. So for you guys out here who are in this transition, right, that a year western varieties might do better, the second year, the next year, eastern varieties may do better, these both here will be actually pretty good options there. Again, really good drought tolerance on Grainfield. Maturity is going to be on the medium of the pack, maybe a notch earlier than what we have on Monument there. Some folks even consider it kind of like a medium early. It all depends on how you're looking at it. I tend to think of this variety as a medium. It can get pretty tall. It has okay standability, probably not the best standability out here, but it hangs in up to some fairly high yield levels fairly well there. The yield on Grainfield tends to come from some very large heads, so it's not necessarily a variety that will tiller a lot, but will put fewer but very large heads. I've counted up to about 40-45 berries in a Grainfield head in the past on higher yielding conditions, so that's just kind of how the yield comes along here. It does have many susceptibilities in terms of diseases here, right? So we'll need to plan on a foliar fungicide, just like we were talking on SY Monument back there, because it's stripe rust susceptible. Leaf rust is getting to Grainfield as well. Probably not the best that we have for wheat streak, so actually quite susceptible to wheat streak mosaic as well. So again, on the rust side, we need to plan on a fungicide, and if there's risk for volunteer wheat nearby, probably not our best option out there. But again, it has been a tough one. It's one that, again, if it's been working for you, definitely I would say still a good one for this region.
So cover the difference between Grainfield and the West bred varieties as it relates to certified seed. In other words, talk a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about that? In other words, you can't replant
Yeah, yep. That's a really good point.
Can you repeat the question because he doesn't have a mic?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely. So the question here is covering the difference between WB Grainfield and some other of the newer varieties from Westbred that actually have a number on them, right? So essentially, a big difference there is the fact that they may or may not be certified seed only. Again, some of the numbered varieties that are newer, they're all being released, they're certified seed only, meaning that you need to buy that seed every year. You cannot save that seed and you're signing an agreement when you buy seed from that variety. Whereas Grainfield, being an older variety, even though it's a Westbred one, it is not certified seed only, meaning that you can keep the seed of this variety here year to year. The majority of the varieties that we will touch on today, they will not be certified seed only, with a few exceptions on coaxium, Clearfield varieties, and most of the newer Westbred varieties. Was that what you had in mind?
Yes.
Yep. So that's a really good point. On Grainfield, you can still keep that seed. And again, it has been a solid variety in this part of the state. What has been your experience with Grainfield?
Yeah, we've grown it probably the last 5 years. It kind of replaced Winter Hawk for us.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess has been doing well, and so we're keeping that around.
Doing very well, yeah.
Yeah, so again, it's one that I've liked. As long as you're willing to budget on that fungicide, you won't need it in a year like this year, but in most years you will probably need it. WB4422, the reason I wanted to skip this variety back in the beginning and talk about it here besides Grainfield is because this variety is kind of being put out as that Grainfield replacement. It's kind of like a variety, again, similar to what we were talking before, that has a good western adaptation, but it moves well into central Kansas, right? So this is the next variety that was just released there in 2022. So just 1 year of data that we have had on this variety so far. Medium early maturing variety. So I think it will be similar to Grainfield, perhaps a day or two earlier than what we have in Grainfield. But again, that medium early category released in 2022. Yield data that we have had, again, just 1 year, tested on K-State trials. It has done really well in the north central part of the state last year. And you guys might remember it was actually a quite dry year there as well. So last year in north central Kansas, it did really well. So it showed a lot of promise there. As we move more south, like towards the south central part of the state, it didn't hold as well. It was still at that average, perhaps above average, but it seems like in this part of the state, it has done quite well. On 4422 here, I think that we'll have improve up on standability in terms of compared even to what we had in Grainfield there. Good milling and baking attributes here also. I'm not sure if it's going to get added to any of those preferred list varieties or not, but Westbred is putting it out as good milling and baking attribute. They were suggesting good winter hardness. I guess this is a good plot for us to look at it. It seems like it's hanging in there, perhaps better than some other varieties. So that may be a good thing going for it. Susceptible to streak mosaic, susceptible to hash and fly as well. So I probably wouldn't plant this one too much in the early part of your planting window because it would be more susceptible to hash and fly with streak mosaic there. Stripe rust, it's also more on the susceptible side, so it may warrant a further fungicide application, and it's susceptible to head scab, so probably not on corn residue there. So let's see how it yields, how it compares to Grainfield. That's kind of what we're benchmarking it against, right? And so if it's, I'm curious to see if it's gonna hold that very good drought tolerance, but also have that potential for response that Grainfield has. What are you seeing on it this year? Because you have it as well, right?
First year we planted it. One of the things that Westbred said was it's a good late plant. It's a good late plant, and what doesn't get tillered in the fall, it'll tend to tiller much better in the spring. It's kind of has the ability to tiller out and to add some tillers that maybe didn't develop in the fall.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I guess we haven't had a chance to look at that, but that would have helped it have as many heads as it has here this year, right? So we always look for that potential, right? Especially going after beans or something along these lines, or planting late and we might just have a cold fall that it didn't tiller out as much there. Having that ability to tiller in the spring is interesting, and we know that some varieties just don't. Like Zenda was one that didn't really tiller as well in the spring, coming from that Everest background, and so interesting to have that possibility there for late planting. KS Dallas, so this is a K-State variety, and Bryson here, he's the CEO of the Kansas Wheat Alliance. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Kansas Wheat Alliance and then jump into Dallas?
Good morning, everybody. Like Romulo and Sandra said, I'm Bryson with KWA. If you're not familiar with KWA, we market and promote the K-State developed wheat varieties. And so a lot of them anymore are going to be monikered with that KS on the front of them. So you'll see a lot of them as we go through here. I'll just touch real quick on KS Dallas. I don't know if anybody's planted around here. It was developed out of the Hayes program, and so it's been more kind of adapted for western Kansas, where it's had a pretty good yield record, specifically in that northwest Kansas. A lot of that can be attributed to decent on leaf rust. It's more susceptible to stripe rust, so you're going to have to watch it on that year. Where it's really strong is on wheat streak mosaic virus. It does carry that WSM2 gene. If you're not familiar with that, there are two different. That WSM2 gene does break down at certain temperatures, and there's two different levels of that temperature threshold. And so Dallas actually carries that higher temperature threshold, so it'll hold on to that WSM2 gene just a little bit longer and give you a little bit more resistance to wheat streak mosaic virus. There's more than just wheat streak in that whole virus complex. You know, you got triticum and high plains, and we're learning about more viruses in that complex, it seems like, every year. And so it does, that WSM2 gene doesn't give you resistance to some of those other viruses that are in that complex as well. So that's kind of where I'd say, you know, if you have a field that you're always fighting wheat streak in it every year, you know, Dallas might be a good option to look at there, just with that WSM2 gene. It's a medium maturity. Some of the watch outs would be average straw strength on it. So if you get it into some heavier soil or higher yielding ground, it would fall down on you. So I said maybe a good option if you're fighting wheat streak as a potential good defensive variety there for you. Otherwise, I think there's probably some better adapted varieties for this area than Dallas.
LCS Helix AX, another coaxium variety that we've seen for a few years now. Helix was being put out as kind of a broad adaptability coaxium variety. Let's keep in mind that most of these coaxium varieties, up today, they actually have a very strong Western background, right? So Colorado State University varieties are in the background of many of these coaxium varieties here, because that's where the coaxium program kind of got started, right, at Colorado State. So many of these will have either bird in the background, like Helix here, or T158 and some other Western adapted varieties. With Helix, it brings a good yield potential. I think among the coaxium varieties, probably if you're pushing for yield potential, might be one of the best ones out there. Medium early maturity, it does well on acid soil conditions. And disease package overall is pretty solid as well. Out of the coaxium varieties, the only one that is resistant to stem rust. Now, stem rust, we don't talk about it too often, but out of the three rusts that we have, stem, stripe and leaf rust, it is the worst one. It's actually the one that can cause more damage to us if we have a year where stem rust is a problem, right? And so keeping that in mind, this one will be resistant, and most of the other varieties that we're talking about here are resistant as well, but a few of them, for example, the other coaxium like Photon or Atomic AX, they would not be resistant to stem rust. On Helix AX here, medium to medium early in terms of maturity. We'll have a Steel AX later on that is more of a late maturity coaxium variety. Yield performance on Steel, it has been in central Kansas, has done well. We move more to western Kansas, it kind of fall down a little bit there. It was more towards the bottom of the pack in that western part of the state. Standability can be a concern on this one. So we've seen where higher yielding conditions there, even though it has the potential, standability can be kind of a concern. For stripe rust and leaf rust, we might have to plan on a fungicide. Again, it has the stem rust resistance, but stripe rust and leaf rust, we may need to plan on a foliar fungicide out here. I guess the performance-wise, I'll be a little bit more leaning towards perhaps Atomic, even though Atomic was released more of a southern Kansas. It has been yielding well. So that will be kind of my go-to. We're probably going to going to be more on the Atomic AX, or for you guys out here, maybe even the Steel AX. Up next here, folks, we have AP Bigfoot. So AP Bigfoot is an Agri-Pro variety. Reason behind the name, when it was coming down the breeding pipeline from within Agri-Pro, they showed me the data, and it seems like it was having a really good performance across a very large geography. So actually, in their data at least, from pretty much from Texas to Montana, it has been performing really well. In our own data, AP Bigfoot has been more average of the pack. We haven't necessarily seen it show up towards the top as Agri-Pro saw in their own data there. If you look at the background of Bigfoot, it's got TEM112 on the background. It also has a Colorado line, and it has SY Wolf. So that background kind of indicates to me at least that it's going to be a little bit better adapted out west. Especially when you think of its maturity being an early maturing variety, kind of like a medium short, good standability variety. I think it may be a better fit as we move to the southwest part of the state. But again, the yield data just hasn't necessarily been there to back it up in our own data so far. Good on acid soils. One concern probably in this region and as we move east with this variety will be soil-borne mosaic virus. How often is that a concern for you guys in this region, soil-borne? See some head and shakes no there? Really not. Is that because it's really not, or is that because most varieties have the tolerance, right? I think we're maybe in the transition, so maybe if east from here is where it gets to be a bigger concern. And keep in mind that pretty much all varieties released to central Kansas, they will be tolerant to soil-borne, and this one is not. So if we have that problem in your farm, definitely want to avoid here. Hash and fly can be a concern, head scab can be a concern on this one as well. So keep an eye, see how it does. In our data so far, it hasn't necessarily been shining too much.
We had 4 different varieties in 200 acres here. Had we planted it all to Bigfoot, we would have taken it to harvest. It survived the best.
Okay.
Did quite well actually.
Okay, so was it this year or last year?
Pardon?
Oh, so this winter?
Yeah.
Okay.
The current crop. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. So again, we're that's good for us to learn. Seems like from our experience there, good winter hardness there. And again, from the drought perspective, we expect this one to have a good drought tolerance there with that TEM112 and Colorado line. So keep an eye, see how it yields. Again, for each condition is going to be different, and perhaps it may be a good fit out here. Rockstar. So folks, Rockstar is a variety that is licensed through Polanski Seed. It has been around since 2019. So for a few years now, we had the chance to take a look at Rockstar. Medium maturity variety. They put it out as a decent head scab tolerance for those acres after corn. Rockstar has good standability as well and handles acid soils well. I don't think that it has the same drought tolerance that some other varieties here may have. So in this region here, maybe we're a little bit too far west for where Rockstar may be better adapted there. But in the central corridor of the state, kind of like probably Republic County and east, it has done quite well. It has had a solid yield record there, very consistently towards that upper end of the variety comparison. So it's one that that yield-wise has done well. It has good tolerance to some of those leaf spotting diseases that are more prevalent in no-till systems wheat on wheat, right? So maybe in that system, Rockstar can be an option there with that good, again, leaf spotting disease package there. Good on acid soils again, and this one has the soil-borne mosaic virus tolerance. So it looks pretty rugged here. Maybe didn't have the same winter hardness that some of the other varieties had. But again, east from here, it has been a good performing variety. Overall, good disease package on this one as well. It's not uncommon for us to come here in the end of the season and as we're doing our ratings, being a variety that actually keep those stem greens all the way to the bottom fairly long in the growing season. So it has a good stay green characteristic there, and I think that comes from some of its disease package. LCS Valiant. Have any of you guys have experience with Valiant around here? perhaps not that much. So Valiant has been around for a number of years now. This variety was actually bred at UNL. So the background of this variety here is coming from Nebraska. But I think that maturity-wise, it was a better fit down south of the border here. And so they marketed it out through Lima Grain so that they could have a bigger footprint. LCS Valiant, it's a medium early maturing variety. It's a variety that has a really good standability and a good drought tolerance as well. Doesn't offer much in terms of acid soil, so it will be quite susceptible to acid soils there. Yield record has been good in north central Kansas. It fell down a little bit more as we go to south central Kansas, but it was still showing up towards the top kind of consistently there. So yield has been there for LCS Valiant in those medium early maturing varieties. Good quality as well, so it's typically well above in terms of protein. There's something that we call protein deviation, which is for its expected yield level, what's the expected protein, and some varieties are above that expected or below, right? Important to say that the yield in the end is our major driver of protein. Higher yield is lower protein, but some varieties deviate from that expected value, higher or lower. LCS Valiant seems to be one on the higher end. There are some concerns on the disease package. It's pretty much a variety that we need to budget on a fungicide again, with quite susceptible there to stripe rust. I don't think it's one that will have much in terms of head scab either here, and powdery mildew can be a concern with streak mosaic virus as well. So it has some weaknesses there on the disease side, but you know, if sprayed there, it has had a good yield record in this part of the state.
Okay, I would also like to recognize some of our sponsors that are here, and they are on the front cover there. And I know we have some representatives here, so I wanted to recognize them. We have a big group from CPI, so if you guys are all raise your hands here. Don't be bashful. Yeah, raise your hands. So we thank them. Kansas Wheat Alliance, and that would be Bryson. We also have Central Valley Ag. That would be Jutton Lehman. And then we have Midway Co-op is here, so if you guys want to raise your hands too. And then I don't think I missed anybody. Is anybody here from Trinity Ag? Okay. We have Agmark here as well. Okay, did I miss anybody else? Okay, there are some others listed on here, but if you see these guys, we thank them for continually sponsoring our wheat plot tours here in the wheat demonstration plot program. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next varieties.
Very well, folks. Keeping up on our varieties here. Next up down the line is a WB4792. So going over their numbering system again, right, that 7 is going to tell us it's a medium late maturing variety, right? And the 9 is a 2019 release. So we've seen a few years of 4792 already. This is going to be more of a Western adapted variety. In fact, it does not have soil-borne mosaic virus resistance. It's susceptible to soil-borne, and so it doesn't really move to central Kansas well. But for Western Kansas, a pretty solid option. In terms of yield record, 2019 it had a really good yield record. 2020, again, it had a good yield record. 2021 was more just like above average. And it seems like in the western part of the state, it seems like it had a little bit better performance in the southwest as compared to the northwest, just to give us some perspective of where it's been kind of yielding better there. It's got some Denby on the background. It also has some Winter Hawk in the background. So we talked about Winter Hawk before, and it has some Simit wheat out there in the background. Looking at it here, it looks pretty thin. I think that it didn't like the winter very much. With this variety, even though it's a medium late for heading, we have seen, if you guys remember that April of 2020, when we had a pretty cold freeze in that mid to late April there, this variety was a little bit further along in terms of coming out of the winter dormancy earlier than some other varieties, and it got dinged pretty bad in that freeze there. So even though it's a medium late for heading, it does come out of the winter fairly early, and so we've seen where it can get hurt by those early spring freezes there. Good standability on this one, good drought tolerance with that Denby and Winter Hawk on the background. We don't measure how varieties are responding to heat stress, but we have a pretty good idea by looking at them in these plots. It seems to be one that handles kind of those late season heat stress a little bit better than others, at least visually there. In 2019, if you guys remember, it was a year when we had a lot of moisture and head scab was a concern, even in the western part of the state, where it's typically not a concern. So it's quite susceptible to head scab. I don't expect that to be a concern that we're going to have every year in western Kansas, but it is quite susceptible to head scab, so that's a concern. I probably would not plant this variety after corn. Very well. Up next, if you guys want to come to this side of the sign.
So yeah, up next we got KS Hamilton. I'll be pretty brief on it. It's going to be pretty similar to Dallas, where honestly I feel like you guys are probably just a little too far east for both Dallas and Hamilton. And once again, it was developed out of the Hayes program, more Western adapted variety. It's had a really strong yield record down in Southwest Kansas. It is a high tillering capacity, and so I think that's maybe one of the reasons why it looks good here. Romulo has some trials where he's got varieties planted side by side. One at 1.2 million and one at 400,000. In Hamilton, it's hard to tell the difference between the two, and I think that, you know, goes all back to its tillering capacity. It also carries the WSM2 gene, so could be another good option there as far as wheat streak mosaic goes, with that high temperature threshold on it. But like I said, I think there's going to be a couple more Western varieties out of the Hayes program here coming up that'd be a little bit better adapted for you guys here.
Folks, AP Prolific, this is a fairly new variety out of the AgriPro lineup. Prolific is about half Everest on the background. If you guys would remember Everest, so about half Everest in the background here, cross back with some Texas line. AP Prolific is going to be, in terms of maturity, medium to medium late, so it's going to be a little bit later there. And standability in higher yielding conditions can be a concern. Now, if you look at the yield record, again, we just have 1 year of data on Prolific, plus data when it was being tested in regional trials before release. It was actually doing really well. And I think that this part of like north central Kansas may be a good fit for AP Prolific. So let's take a look at it and see how it does. One concern that we can have here with the same Everest background is drought, right? Everest was not the best variety in terms of drought, but even in this region, if a year that you guys have enough moisture out there, might do quite well. AP Prolific, really good tillering ability. We saw it where it was planted at low populations and tillered out a lot and really filled up that canopy. It doesn't look too happy here, so I'm thinking that it kind of lost some of the plants there through during that winter kill that we have had. But again, just a plot that we were yesterday in Phillipsburg, we had some germination issues and it tillered out quite well, and it has a good canopy. And so again, good tillering potential on that medium to medium late maturity side. Keep an eye and see how it does here in the test plots that we have around. May be a good option for this region. With that Everest background as well, one thing that I didn't mention, but it does bring good head scab tolerance. It also brings a decent barley yellow dwarf tolerance, and it has a gene for acid soil tolerance as well, so acid soil should not be a concern. Pretty decent disease package in terms of leaf stripe and stem rust on this one here. So yeah, keep an eye. Maybe one to have on the short list. Let's see how it yields. LCS Steel AX. So again, we're back to those coaxium varieties. Steel AX is the newest release out of Lima Grain. That is a coaxium one. Think of this variety as a cross between LCS Chrome, that we just talked about a minute ago, and Bird, the Colorado variety, Colorado State University variety with pretty good drought tolerance. So LCS Steel AX should have a really good drought tolerance. Actually, this year it has looked quite well in many of our plots. Seems like it's handling that drought better than some other varieties out there. Looking at it here, it seems like it lost some plants out there, but not nearly as much as its neighbor on Prolific there. Just like Chrome, it may be a little bit on the late side of maturity, so probably wouldn't be a variety that I just plant all my acres to it. just to spread my risk, right? We don't want to have all my acres planted to a late maturing variety that may get caught on the heat more often. And we don't want to plant everything to an early one that is more risky to get caught in a freeze either, right? And so just think about that when considering this variety. It's going to be quite a bit on the late side there, which for you guys here may not be as much of a concern as we move south, but again, something to consider. On Steel AX, again, good drought tolerance, good standability on this variety here as well. Curomite, they seem to think it has curomite resistance as well to delay the spread of a wheat streak mosaic virus. Not much in terms of stripe rust or stem rust on this variety here. So maybe might need to consider a further fungicide there. And just about average quality. On the quality piece side, we were just touching base here just a minute ago, and there's that protein plant, right? That's going to be functional starting in August there in Phillipsburg. Also in Russell, there's another one, so you guys have that access to nearby protein plants where you might get a premium on growing higher protein varieties, right? So we can make a quick discussion around that here, but again, the main thing driving that protein is going to be your environment, right? If it turns out to be hot and dry, we cut back the amount of starch being put up in that grain, and so our protein goes up. If it's cool and moist, we allow the plant to make more photosynthesis longer, put more starch in the grain, and there's just a dilution on that protein, right? Now, given the environment, right, what can we manage? Given that we cannot manage the environment, what can we manage going after protein? So think of dials, right? How much can we control that protein? Environment being a big dial. The next one is our fertility management, a little bit smaller dial there, right? But especially through nitrogen management, we can manage that protein level if we're shooting for those high protein levels for any type of premium that we might have. Usually, you know, we will need more nitrogen to max out our protein than we will to max out our yield. In fact, if you have a protein level of about 11.5, so if you have about 11.5 protein, that means that you max out your yield, right? So pretty much if you had less than that, you're leaving yield on the table for not having enough nitrogen out there. So if you look back in your protein over the years and you are around that 11.5 on average, you're in pretty good place because you're not leaving yield on the table for lack of nitrogen, and you're not just removing a lot of nitrogen from your system either. Now if you're going after those premiums, right, that need to start at 12% many times, then you need more nitrogen in that system, right? That's kind of how we're going to get there, because again, we need probably, if you're at that 11.5, you're going to max out your protein probably with another 20 units of nitrogen out there. You can reach that maximum protein from that 11.5 place. Nitrogen timing is important as well. The later in the season we go with the nitrogen, the less it's going for yield, the more it's going for protein, right? So if we're putting it all in the fall, or if you're putting it all early spring, chances are a lot of that's going to go for yield. But you can max out your protein as well. You might just need more nitrogen there. If you're delaying it, kind of, for example, splitting it and going a little bit more towards that jointing stage, you're already going a little bit more towards protein. And on the end extreme, where you come here at the flowering stage, or even at the boot or flower, in between boot and flower stage, and we give it a shot of fungicide and we add some liquid nitrogen there, you can still drive your protein. That nitrogen is not going to do anything for your grain yield, but it can drive your protein there, perhaps 0.5% up to a point or so with that late season nitrogen application. So just some quick comments there on managing our protein. And then coming back to those dials, the smallest one is going to be your variety. So you can manage protein through variety, but that's a smaller dial than your nitrogen or than your environment. If you're getting paid for baking quality, is a different concept there. If it's just getting paid for protein, variety is a little bit smaller dial. Now if you're getting paid for baking quality, it makes a big difference whether your variety has that protein quality or not. We've seen varieties with high protein but low baking quality. Those programs are still very, I mean, in the beginning, but there are opportunities there to get paid by milling and baking quality here in Kansas. So any questions or comments on that and the protein issue before we move for the varieties again? Very well, AP EverRock. So AP EverRock, it will be there a cross between Everest, Pulse Rock and SY Wolf. EverRock has been around now for a few years as well. It's a variety that has a good tolerance to low soil pH, so usually acid soil is not a concern here on EverRock. Barley yellow dwarf is pretty decent as well, so for those early planting, maybe an option. It puts a good amount of forage out there. Good standability on EverRock here as well. Maybe some of the couple concerns that we'll have, stripe rust, so probably we need a further fungicide there. Drought is also not his main calling card, so it's a little bit more sensitive to drought stress than some other varieties there. On the disease side, 10 spot with streak mosaic is going to be pretty susceptible here as well. And in our yield data, at least, it has been kind of in that middle of the pack. Hasn't necessarily been showing up towards the top as much. I think within the AgriPro lineup of the new varieties, Prolific will be one that I'm kind of keeping my eye a little bit closer on just because of its performance.
What do you consider low pH?
Really good question. What do we consider low pH? So we've done quite a bit of research on these, right? And the way the pH and yield works, it's not an on and off switch, right? It's actually kind of like a gradual decline in your yield if your soil is below a given threshold. Now that threshold differs by variety, right? So let's give you an example of a very sensitive variety, like a 4699 or a Wolverine or something that is quite susceptible to low soil pH. That switch, that drop is going to start maybe as high as 5.7, 5.9. You know, you can start already not being able to reach 100% of what that variety can give you. Doesn't mean that it's going to tank at 5.5, but it's just not reaching its full potential, right? So for a susceptible variety, I think it's above that 5.5 they usually talk about. 5.7, I've seen as low as high as 5.9. The varieties are already kind of breaking down. In a tolerant variety, that level can be as low as 5. 4.9, I've measured in a variety called Duster from Oklahoma as low as about 4.9. So you have a full pH point where variety is going to make a big difference there. We usually say 5.5 as a general rule of thumb because that's kind of our average point there, right? And for most varieties, 5.5 should still yield relatively okay. But again, if you're planting a very susceptible variety to low soil pH, that threshold where it starts to come down can be as high as about 5.7 to 5.9 range. And if you get something like a double stop or a Zenda or a Hatchet, some varieties that have a pretty good, decent acid soil tolerance, you might not be losing any yield as low as 5. Not that we recommend that, but if you're below that 5.5 level, we probably need to be looking into liming. Yep. WB 4595 is another West bred variety that is more of a Western adapted variety. So this variety here, it does not have, just like the 4792, it does not have soil-borne mosaic virus, so it doesn't move to central Kansas too well. It's a medium maturity variety, also released in 2019. Good standability on this variety here, hangs in there in terms of stripe rust, seems to have a good resistance as well. Acid soils and soil-borne mosaic are going to be the major concern here, so again, it's one of the more susceptible varieties there on acid soil. Good on stripe rust, intermediate on wheat streak mosaic, meaning that probably we don't have any gene that makes it handle wheat streak mosaic well. But observational, whenever we have a high wheat streak mosaic incidence, it tends to hang in there a little bit better than the average variety will. In terms of yield potential, in the northwest part of the country, it seems to have a better yield record than it does in the southwest. So again, this one, in terms of just like yield performance, seems like Northwest has actually been doing quite well. Coming up next here, folks, we have LCS Julep. How many of you planted the LCS Mint in the past? Maybe not as many, perhaps Mint was not a widely adapted variety around here. So LCS Julep is essentially an LCS Mint type of variety in terms of maturity, in terms of drought tolerance, acid soils and whatnot. However, with better standability. So one of the things that we didn't like about Mint was that it didn't have much standability. It actually would, in higher yielding conditions, it would actually lodge a little bit more consistently than what we would like. And that's one thing that they're trying to fix here in LCS Julep. I will note that Julep was released as a certified seed-only variety back a couple of years ago. However, they pulled that back, and actually you can save seed from LCS Julep today, which you could not as soon as it was released there. It was also released with a good stripe rust package. However, it lost that stripe rust resistance whenever, well, just with the more recent race change there. So probably one that needs a foliar fungicide there. This year it has been looking quite good across many trials. I think that its drought tolerance that it has is helping it out to just like visually, at least this year, seems to be hanging in better there in drought. Although yield-wise has been in the middle of the pack for a bunch of our trials that we have across the state there. Let's see how it does this year. It might be one on that medium late maturity that can serve a good purpose on dry years like these.
Up next is KS Providence. It's the newest release out of the Manhattan program that we're pretty excited about. Yeah, Alan, the breeder there, he likes to use a lot of the West bred, like 4699 as a check. He feels like that's a very strong variety for Central Kansas. And Providence has been consistently beating it. So he's pretty excited about that. Has some good high-end yield potential, but it also has some really good stable potential on the bottom when we get into those tougher situations. We think the last 5 years, you know, in the breeding program, the yield trials it's gone through, the years it's gone through, it's kind of gone through some extremes from pretty wet year in 2019 to last couple years have been pretty dry, and this has always been towards the top of his program. A lot of that goes back to its disease package. Has a fairly good disease package, moderate resistant to leaf rust. It's going to be intermediate to stripe rust, but it's a little bit slower to get going in it. That may allow you to delay that fungicide and get it more on that flowering time to go after scab and stripe rust at the same time. As far as scab tolerance goes, it does have some scab tolerance. It's not going to be the level of like Zinda or Everest or some of the newer ones from Westbred, but it's going to be maybe just a touch behind Zinda. It still would be a good option for those after corn acres. And it does have some wheat streak mosaic virus resistance. It doesn't carry a specific gene for it, but it does have a little bit of tolerance to that virus complex. Couple watch outs on it. There's going to be Hessian fly. It's not resistant to Hessian fly, so maybe you don't want to plant it super early. And then just average quality. So if you're going after a premium market, it's definitely not going to be one that you'd be planting for those markets. It does carry a little bit unique pedigree in the background. It does have Carl 92 in the background, and it does carry a Simmet spring wheat in the background of it. And so we have seen good winter hardiness in the trials. I'm kind of wondering if this isn't a little bit of issue here that we're seeing with the winter hardiness issues we've seen around here. So I don't know, this year is kind of extreme on the winter hardiness from what I've seen, and so I don't know if I'd be too concerned about it, but it may be a watch out on it as well. But overall, we're pretty excited about that. We think it's going to take quite a few acres, and Central Corridor and has good enough drought tolerance that I think it will move west pretty well as well over into the Hayes 183 area. So maybe one to keep an eye out for here.
Yeah, I would agree with Bryson. I think that we're quite excited with Providence there. Take a look at it, see what it yields in our yield data there as well. But overall has been a very stable variety with really good yield potential. HG Force. HG Force, I have not seen it very many times yet. Seems like I've seen it here in a few trials around this region here last year. And we had somebody that actually was talking a little bit more about this variety. I made a few notes here, but again, I haven't necessarily had too much experience with HG Force myself. Anybody here has had more experience with HG Force? Well, seems like not many of you, but some of the comments that I had from last year here was a good standability. It does have a decent soil-borne mosaic virus resistance. And they mention a good winter hardiness, which looking here, it does seem like it holds true. It's actually looking pretty decent in terms of the amount of heads that we see out there. Good test weight, leaf rust, and good on soil-borne mosaic as well. Just with a watch out on moderate stripe rust. Very well. Those are some of the comments that I had on this variety out here.
Okay, we probably need to hustle up because we're supposed to be eating lunch now. So
Okay.
5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Sandra told me I got 5 minutes, so I'll take up 4 of it here with Western Star. Now, I won't touch too much on Western Star. It is out of the Hayes program as well, similar to Hamilton and Dallas, but I think it probably has the best adaptability here for you guys, and as we move into central Kansas. It does carry soil-borne mosaic resistance, so it allows it to move further east, and I've seen it do pretty well, you know, as we move into central Kansas. Out of the K-State varieties, it's probably going to have the best drought tolerance, and so if you're, you know, concerned about that, would be a variety to look there. It has bird in the background of it, and that's where it gets a lot of that good drought tolerance. Bird is known for not really having any good disease package, but this one is intermediate on your leaf and stripe rust. It does carry the CMC4 gene, which is the wheat curl mite resistance gene. That doesn't give you complete resistance against the curl mite. It can overcome that eventually, but it does give you some tolerance to the curl mite, which carries your wheat streak and high plains and triticum, all of those viruses. So it is also resistant to the trim V virus, susceptible to wheat streak, but like I said, that wheat curl mite does give it some resistance there. Overall, I like this, like I said, as we move east for being a Western wheat, and maybe one to keep an eye on. It was released in 2019, so there's a lot of good data out there for it.
Folks, Paradise, very quickly here, is another Polanski variety that has been around since 2017. I tend to think of this variety as a pretty good drought tolerance on it, and so it has had a decent yield record when we have had dry years. One thing that Paradise perhaps didn't have as much is standability, and so we've seen its yield bounce back and forth more than I'd like, mostly because in those very high yielding conditions, I think that it kind of ended up lodging and not necessarily bringing that to the table. Head scab is going to be a concern, so probably not one to put after corn, so just keeping that in mind. It has this look that reminds me quite a bit of that 4458, which was also quite susceptible to head scab. Good on low soil pH, good for grazing there. Stripe rust and stem rust seems to be holding up okay, but again, that yield variability, I think that it has come from some of the standability issues that it has had, and perhaps some more head scab issues there as well. That April 2020, it's a variety that actually got hurt from that freeze as well, again, being an early, medium early to early maturing variety. That freeze kind of led to some yield damage in this variety, a little bit more than others there. Here we have LCS, so it's written AP Atomic, but I believe this is a mistake. It should be LCS Atomic AX, so another coaxium variety. Out of the coaxium varieties, the LCS Atomic AX is going to be the earliest one, so it's an early maturing variety. It has had a pretty decent yield record across the central part of the state. Initially, we were thinking it was going to be a better fit just in the south central, southwest portion of the state, but it has moved up in yield quite well to the north central part of the state as well. Atomic is one that has a little bit better standability in terms of handling higher yielding conditions there. And again, just from a yield performance within the coaxium varieties is one that I've been kind of like liking how it's being performed. So I'm keeping an eye on. If you need to be on that coaxium technology, Atomic may be one to take a look at. One thing that we talked about these varieties that have a bird on their background is stem rust susceptibility, right? So it will be susceptible to stem rust. Tillering is going to be average to below average there, but it's a variety that can handle drought and low soil pH fairly well.
I'll just touch on territory real quick. This is a brand new release out of the Hayes program here this last fall. So it'd be in seed producers' fields right now. Pretty excited about it. It brings a good yield potential. It's going to be maybe a touch better than Dallas and Hamilton. And I think it'll potentially move a little bit further east than both of those. I think that's still probably out for verdict on it, but maybe one to kind of keep an eye on and see how it does in the yield trials here, for, this year and into next year, to see how it performs as we do move east. Decent disease package, resistant to stripe rust, a little bit susceptible to leaf rust, and it does carry that WSM2 gene. It's at the lower temperature threshold, so it won't give you as good as resistance as Dallas and Hamilton, but will give you some resistance to it. It also carries trim V resistance. So.
Okay, I think that's all the varieties for right now. I do have two other real quick information. If you haven't heard about the Weather Data Library, the Kansas Mesonet, there's a little brochure on it. It gives you soil temperatures 2 to 4 inches. It gives you wind speeds. It gives you a lot of information on there. It's from K-State. So if you want to know where that data is, pick up one of these brochures. If you're a weather person and you want to measure the weather and report it, you can be a Coco Roz. It's a community collaborative rain, hail, and snow network. You get a really nice rain gauge. So if you want to be a part of that, pick up this brochure too, and we'll gladly put you on the list and group to report some of this information as well.